Hello,
Hello.
welcome to Cinema Spotlight with Jake and Reuben. I'm Reuben.
And I'm Jake. This is your regular recap of all the latest films and re-releases hitting screens this week.
Now, this week, if you are craving a good time at the cinema, stay away from J.C. Chandor's new film starring Aaron Taylor-Johnson. That's right, it's Kraven the Hunter.
And we travel back to Middle-earth, but this time in an animated form with Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim.
And Luca Guadagnino releases his second film of the year. Daniel Craig stars in Queer.
Now, I just want to take a second to call out to all you young filmmakers and independent cinemas out there. We're looking for new people to interview and new places to visit in the new year. And we'd love to hear from you. So if you would like to, just email us at cinemaspotlightjakeandreuben@gmail.com. We would really love to see your aspiring new works, whatever you've got going on. We're looking for not just directors or producers, writers, cinematographers, costume design, production design, whatever. We love film and we want people to talk about it on the show. So please just get in contact and we'd love to have you on.
And please make sure that you are following us over on Spotify so that you can enjoy Cinema Spotlight as an audio experience. Like and subscribe to our YouTube page, and please let us know what you think of the films in the comments. First up, we are going to talk about Kraven the Hunter, which is the new film and possibly the last in Sony's sort of Spider-Man adjacent universe. It's directed by J.C. Chandor, who's previously made excellent films like All Is Lost and Margin Call, and it stars Aaron Taylor-Johnson, could he be the next Bond, as a man with superhuman hunting powers. Let's talk about Kraven the Hunter, because I think this is going to be one of the worst films that we watched this year, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it straight away.
Well, now you mentioned he may be a future Bond.
Yes.
And there's the hot air of oh yes, this hip, he played John Lennon, and I guess he was good at that, and he's in everything, and I guess people liked that. I wonder if you can tell where I'm going with this. And he's in Kraven the Hunter, a big IP. Well, not really, and he's dreadful in it. I hated this film. I absolutely loathed it. And I mean, to the point where I have seen the first Venom. Mm-hmm. I didn't watch the others because I didn't need to. First Venom got more hate than it deserved. I think it's a bad film. It got lambasted, but they were interesting. Tom Hardy was doing something interesting. Good? Yeah. Maybe that's a word I wouldn't say. Interesting, definitely. I saw Morbius.
Wow.
And that film is badly made. It's just a filmmaker's nightmare. I saw Madam Web.
Okay.
And Madam Web is absolutely, that film doesn't exist. It's like a fart in the wind. And then I saw this film and I was like, well, I've gone this far in the Sony universe. And Sony have made some great Spider-Man films. The Raimi trilogy, even the third one, when you watch it in context, has a much better understanding of the character. And of course, you have the best Spider-Man media. Probably. I prefer Spider-Man 2 and the Raimi Spider-Man. However, I understand that Spider-Verse is, without a doubt, the best version of Spider-Man we've seen on screen. And I stick to it. These films do not work when you're trying to make these villains the heroes of their own terrible, terrible, terrible stories that oh my God, I'm lost for words, viewers, because this is a barbaric film in every aspect of it. It's filmed okay, it's filmed competently well, but it's not interesting. It's just coverage, it's just action scenes, it's nonsense.
Yeah.
Russell Crowe does his typical crap action, his terrible, just garbled mess of he did the same for Thor, Love and Thunder. He did that Pope's Exorcist film. And, we've seen him in a great film that we've talked about in Cinema Spotlight.
Yeah.
This brilliant he is a brilliant actor, and he's just giving this stereotypical, awful performance. And he talked a lot about the script of Gladiator, saying, I'm the best actor in the world. I can make anything good. He didn't make this good. He didn't make this good at all. Terrible. Everyone's bad. Aaron Taylor-Johnson has anti-charisma.
He's Cockney. He's confusingly.
He's half American, and then they're Russian, but they don't speak Russian with a Russian dad, and it just makes no sense. This film is an origin story for Kraven the Hunter, some people's favorite Spider-Man villain. I love Spider-Man. I love the character. And same with Batman. I think these films of just the villains don't work without that character, because you need them to have a reason to exist. Kraven the Hunter is a villain, and he's portrayed as, well, nothing, really. I don't know if you saw a character in this mess of a film. And I'm just, verbal diarrhea now, because I sat in the cinema, I was bored to tears. And when I was muttering some expletives under my breath when it had ended about how bad the film was, someone laughed on the way out because I think they agreed. Now, I can talk about every aspect of this film, but first, Reuben, please tell me, what's your opinion?
Okay, so I watched this at 9 a.m, first thing, and I thought, okay, listen, I really do rate the director, J.C. Chandor. He is a fantastic director. Margin Call somehow makes the 2008 financial crash unbelievably tense and thrilling. And then All Is Lost is Robert Redford lost at sea on a raft. And he's the only actor in it for the entire runtime. I think it's got one sentence in it. It is brilliant, brilliant filmmaking. And for me, it's just depressing to see talent like him coming over and just making something that's just, a bit of corporate IP, basically. It's utterly lifeless. And I sat there watching this just completely uninspired bit of filmmaking, which incidentally begins with homage to The Hunt for Red October in a way that I thought was just made me want to be watching The Hunt for Red October, because I love that film. And I just started to feel my eyelids drooping because I felt no connection with the characters. I didn't care about it kind of already, it gets convoluted very early on. The accents, as you say, are completely preposterous. There's just nothing going for this film at all. The effects are shoddy. The way in which Aaron Taylor-Johnson moves around in the action scenes is all CG augmented, and it looks completely fake. It looks like when you see Halle Berry in that
rubbery.
film.
It looks very rubbery.
Completely. And I just couldn't get remotely into the film. We talked about Red One a few weeks ago, and the only thing we could say that was nice about Red One was that it has really good character design. There isn't even that to redeem Kraven the Hunter. There is an
terrible character design.
awful villain. I'm going to spoil it. It's Rhino, right?
Yeah,
the Spider-Man villain,
yeah.
Rhino.
Yeah.
And the way that they have designed this villain is completely... It's just pants. The whole film is pants. It's like everyone on set took some kind of weird accent pill, because Aaron Taylor-Johnson is alternating seemingly just at random between Cockney and a little bit American, a little bit Matthew McConaughey.
And then a bad Russian.
And then a bad Russian.
Yeah.
Max Hetchinger, I actually think, is the sole redeeming feature of this film. We last saw him in Gladiator 2.
Yeah.
Because he's having fun. He's having fun, and nobody else is. Nobody else is. And I actually thought that at least his accent was consistent. And then you have Ariana DeBose, and I didn't realize it was Ariana DeBose until the credits rolled. Academy Award winner. Ariana
Give
DeBose,
it back.
who I love.
Give it back.
She is dreadful in this. She delivers every single sentence like she's reading it for the first time on the page.
Yeah.
It's so monosyllabic, it's so monotone, and the only person giving a worse performance than her is in a flashback sequence. We see her mother, I think it is. And I've never seen an exposition delivered so leadenly. It is one of the worst bits of acting I've ever seen in a film. It is astonishing that is in a big budget film that was put out in cinemas, because it is just awful.
Well, that's the problem with all these Sony-verse villain films. It's just absolutely garbled exposition that makes no sense in the context of the world.
Can you tell me what the plot of this film was? Because I have already forgotten.
Okay, so we open in... You do the typical thing where you get a snippet of present day.
Yes.
And Aaron Taylor-Johnson kills this killer villain. Full spoilers. Don't go see this film. I'd avoid it at all costs. So unless you want a little nap. Because I did find it quite soporific. And I'll tell you, after I woke up from my nap, and I don't think I missed anything important, I only slept for about 7 minutes, I think. I woke up and I thought, okay, the only way I'm going to be able to get through this is if I just allow myself to laugh, because I just felt like I was suppressing all of my rage. Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
And so after I woke up, I just thought, I'm just going to laugh openly.
No, this is the thing, and this plot is just it's typical nonsense. A terrible thing happens. The kid version of Kraven the Hunter is maimed and attacked by this big lion. We get sent back in time. He gets attacked by this lion. This terrible voodoo African magic, which doesn't get explained.
Quite offensive.
And the comic books, they have their stereotypes, and there's no context to what these characters are, and it's just hidden for future Calypso's quite a big Spider-Man character, but then...
Oh, really?
But I think she sees the future. I think that's what they were trying to go with the tarot cards. Please, Spider-Man and Marvel fans, don't attack me in the comments.
Or / let us know what we've got wrong.
What we've got wrong.
I would love to understand this film even a little bit.
And this script is like it was written by a block of Stilton cheese. It's just nonsense. It's worse than AI because it has stupid decisions, which I think AI often avoids. Is like it makes really boring but clumsy, like the Rhino's outfit is just goofy. He wears this tiny backpack and he walks this dog and he's supposed to be this menacing, calm, but also really aggressive villain. And it's absolute nonsense. And you're right. It's like they picked every Eastern or Russian adjacent character from the Spider-Man comics, the chameleons in this. If you know that character from Spider-Man, and then he gets shoehorned, like his actual character and character design gets shoehorned in the last couple of minutes.
It's awful.
It's not just awful. It is. No, I'm going to admit something. I said Red One was the worst of the year. I said it cannot be dethroned. But you're right. Red One had one redeeming factor. This film is garbage.
I've just come up with one redeeming factor.
Okay, well, tell me what the hell that is.
The one redeeming factor, and I did think this when I was watching it, is you know what? They clearly filmed a lot on location. So while Red One is all green screen, in this, sometimes, in fact, often, you look at it and you go, oh, those are real mountains. Like, this is a real forest. It has it has a tang of reality to it, which is quite refreshing for this genre.
It does, but I also, from that point, it just reminded me that when I was sat and watching it, I was like, this is really cheap. Because it looks like they've just filmed everything in the UK. And not that that's a bad thing, no, but because you're trying to be this big world-conquering film, he goes to Russia, he goes to Africa.
There's a lot of titles telling you where we are.
And it's nowhere specific, it's just outside London.
Yeah.
What Scotland?
North of Turkey.
Yeah, where is that?
Yeah.
But it does feel like, okay, we can film in the UK really cheap. All our extras and whatever, most of our lead casts are British doing a terrible accent.
Yeah.
With a few Americans, a few, whatever. We can get away with that. It just feels like upstate New York looks like it's probably England.
Yeah, it looks like Egypt.
Oh, it really does.
Yeah.
And then even Africa kind of looks a bit, and the Russian forest kind of like, doesn't really feel like Siberia or anything.
They've just color graded the sky a little bit so it looks like it's a sunny day.
Slightly more orange in Africa, slighly more blue in Russia. It's just stereotypical, terrible, lazy filmmaking.
Yeah.
The script is awful. One of Kraven's first major lines in English is the unseen and untalked about pilot of the and again, female representation in this film is nowhere existent. There's not even a love, you think they're going to shoehorn a love story with
Ariana
Calypso's character, and you're like, no, she just doesn't do anything.
No,
she has some ex machina moments where I'm like, well, that makes no sense. And there's 10 villains in this film.
Yeah.
B grade, D grade supervillains from Spider-Man. And I hate it. You need to have that linchpin. I keep saying it.
Yeah.
The linchpin that Spider-Man, this wonderfully naive, hopeful character, he is the one who has to stand against the corruption of all these villains that are faced. Kraven is corrupted by the greed. Russell Crowe was playing the Kraven of the comics and of wider Spider-Man media.
Right.
Aaron Taylor Johnson was playing just this bland action hero. It doesn't make any sense that these villains sort of exist in a world where that character doesn't exist.
Yes.
And it feels very much Spider-Man doesn't exist. And they're not even fun bad.
No. Don't go and see this thinking it's going to be so bad it's good. I know I said that I was laughing through it, but that was a survival tactic.
Yeah, absolutely. That was you go a bit delusional.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would actually put a sign and say, please avoid this film. Just please avoid it because you don't get anything out of it.
Can I just tell you some things that really annoy me?
Yes.
Because there are just lists in my head right now. So they use a bunch of stock footage multiple times. Okay, they use a shot of the London skyline with the Shard that is also the opening shot of the Star Beast, last year's episode of Doctor Who. Yeah. And they use the same bit of stock footage of London Bridge, which is also in Doctor Who, 5 seconds later in the Doctor episode, about half an hour later in the film, and they've just tweaked the color grade so it looks like a different day. But it just looks cheap and it looks lazy and it looks like stock footage because I don't know if they actually shot any exteriors in London, but it sort of feels like one of those ones where they've put some red buses in places so that we think we're seeing London, but actually we're not. To me, in many ways, that felt like the epitome of the film in that it just felt lazy and cheap. We're not actually in London. We're using a bit of stock footage. We're reusing the same stock footage twice because we just don't care. And then there's stuff like, you talked about Chameleon, who is this character, his brother. And the whole shtick, basically, for this character is all the way through the film, he's imitating people and he's doing their accent. But the problem is that they literally just dub in.
Yeah.
So he impersonates his dad, who is Russell Crowe, a lot. And they just get Russell Crowe to dub in those lines. The disrespect from the audience, just like using the stock footage and reusing it, and like just
there's a sound effect they use. Did you notice when during all the Kraven I'm turning into an animal, they use this twinkly sound effect that is the stock twinkly, Final Cut, Adobe Premiere stock, mystical background noise, and I was listening like, how cheap? Who got paid to edit this trash? It's absolute
lazy.
Garbage.
It's lazy. I really, truly felt like the film and the distributors and the studio just didn't care about me.
Sony just gave up.
Yeah.
This is embarrassing. This movie is embarrassing.
It's so embarrassing. It's so embarrassing. But that's really, I think, the fundamental crux of it, isn't it? Is, at the end of this, hopefully lessons have been learned.
Absolutely.
Right? Sony aren't making any more spunk films. Aaron Taylor-Johnson is hopefully going to go on and do something cool and creative and maybe Bondy. JC Chandor, hopefully this has opened some doors for him.
Maybe
and we
he's
can
got a good
all
paycheck.
just imagine that this was a horrible dream.
Now, with great power comes great responsibility, and you have a responsibility not to see this film. Next, we talk about Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim, which sees us 200 years before the events of Frodo and the Ring. We follow Hira, Princess of Rohan, as war brews across Middle-earth. Families are tested and legends are crafted. So, now this film I thought was really interesting. And we were talking before the cameras rolled. Nostalgia bait is a term that we might use quite a lot in this one, Reuben. But I'd love to know your opinion because I'm very, just off the bat, I don't know how to feel really. It's not strong feelings, but I'd love to know what your opinion is.
Yes, okay, so basically we're now entering sort of the Middle-earth era 2.0, right? Where essentially the rights to the Tolkien books are too much of an exciting opportunity to make money to not be churning out content every year. So obviously we've got The Rings of Power over on Amazon. We've got The Hunt for Gollum being directed by Andy Serkis, who of course made Venom 2. Throwback, a little link to our last section. And now we have this animation. And because of the fact that the Lord of the Rings films are hugely beloved, we obviously have an attempt to kind of tie this into the narrative, into the fabric of Lord of the Rings, into The Hobbit, although they are, I think, less beloved. And so we have this, I would say, completely unnecessary, but perfectly inoffensive animation. Now, the first hour of this, I have to say, I was quite bored. I watched it with my brother. We're both huge Lord of the Rings fans. We went and saw this together. And as we were leaving, I compared it to like a microwave lasagna, right? Because essentially, all of the bits of Lord of the Rings that you love and you remember are there, right? Middle-earth is there. The fantastic themes by Howard Shore are there. You've got this lovely Alan Lee design as well of Middle-earth, which is so impressive. Like, he is the guiding light for all of these Lord of the Rings Middle-earth films. And to a certain extent, all of that means that it's fine, right? Because I love all of this stuff. All of that stuff, as a fan of Lord of the Rings, is kind of satisfying, but it's entirely hollow and it's so cynical. Like, you can feel that they are just doing it because suckers like me will be like, oh, wow, that's Eowyn on the soundtrack, you know? So, as much as I was sort of engaged by that, I also was very conscious that I was being taken for a ride. And it all feels very, very cash grabby. To go back to the lasagna metaphor.
Love it. Love it.
When you have all of these elements from other films that you love essentially being reheated, but they're not really of the same quality. And indeed, there are specific shots and there are specific sequences lifted straight out of the Lord of the Rings films.
Especially, it felt like a micro Two Towers.
I agree. But also, I would say that for me, the most egregious part was we have the sequence in Return of the King, right, where the riders of Rohan ride in at Minas Tirith, and we have the absolutely brilliant speech by Theoden, right, where they all scream "Death!" and it's amazing. They literally do that again in this film, and you just think, why am I not watching Return of the King now? Because that's a masterpiece, and this is thoroughly flawed. So it's a real relief when the second hour of the film kicks in, and suddenly it finds a story. So essentially, this is following, as you mentioned, Hera, this princess of Rohan, and her father, Helm Hammerhand, who is voiced, I thought, very joyously by Brian Cox, who is
voice.
Inexplicably Scottish. I love, again, this is a film with random accents. People who are related have no
I'm going to delve into that.
Continuity in accents. And we see her, basically, they go to Helm's Deep because war comes to Rohan. They retreat to Helm's Deep. It's not called Helm's Deep yet.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. It's an origin story for Helm's Deep.
It is. If you love that sequence in Two Towers, you're going to appreciate this film with a very small appreciation.
But it suddenly kicks up a notch when we suddenly start having this kind of, I thought, quite interesting look at kind of legend and the power of legend and the power of sort of storytelling and the way that it can kind of latch onto a mind. And the characters start coming to life, I think, in the second half of the film in a way that they're just completely kind of stale at the start. And we also get some quite nicely done action sequences. I have to say, having watched Solo Leveling Reawakening last week, having watched, I think, the creativity on display in that animated, action film, I was quite critical, I think, therefore, of some of the fight scenes in this, which are broadly fine. They're not bad, but they're okay. I think there is a really satisfying big kind of fight at the end, which I did find, exciting and engaging. But I thought overall the action was a bit lackluster. And it has, I think, that thing that a lot of the sort of post Lord of the Rings content has, where it all feels a little bit like just a build up to Fellowship of the Ring. And I did feel that here. But overall, I had a fine time. I liked the second half decently. I didn't particularly care for the first half, but it was kind of nostalgic. And I came out of the cinema thinking, you know what? I love Lord of the Rings, and that sure was kind of Lord of the Rings. So I think it's okay.
Well, see, I have a problem with it because you said this thing that it gets better when it starts talking about the more mythical, the idea of storytelling. And it is spoken like a story. There's a voiceover to be like, this is a tale of the rise of this kingdom or the fall of this kingdom and the rebuilding of it, I think, is best. But it lacks that mythic quality. Like, you look at the Jackson films, because I'm not the hugest Lord of the Rings fan. I appreciate those films. No, that's not me saying this, but I know it's good and I like them.
They are my favorite films of all time.
Well, quite rightly, because they are some of the best made films ever, just hands down. However, I didn't grow up with loving the lore. I was more sci-fi than fantasy, or if it was fantasy, it had to be bizarre 80s fantasy, lots of, people being thrust into a world and running around with deranged pop stars. But this film lacked for me it just felt like very mediocre political drama. And it was it reminded me of the film The Northman, which a hilarious story.
Which I would describe as a masterpiece.
Oh my. Northman, I think, was an absolute mess of a film because it was just dull, in my opinion. I'm sure we'll get into it. But because it is this ancient story that feels very grandiose, but didn't have what I come to know Middle-earth as that it was, to me, the negative side of Middle-earth is more related to the human drama, whereas I prefer when it looks at the ecological drama or the drama to smaller communities. That hobbits are a very good representation of civilian communities. And this just felt like it was a lot of pompous male idiots making pompous male idiot choices. And my problem was that the villains in Lord of the Rings are very clear-cut because they're influenced by a negative power, a power that is supernaturally evil, and a power that corrupts absolutely, even good. And that is like a darkness that sweeps across the land, but good strides. And it's a very clear-cut story. And visually, especially in Peter Jackson's, very visually you can tell.
And it's about masculinity. I always think when I watch Lord of the Rings, actually, I'm always struck by how much actually those stories are really engaging with kind of narratives of I mean, we would call it toxic masculinity these days. And I think what you were saying there about the villain in particular. What's the villain's motivation?
It has no motivation.
Yeah.
It's like, and also his father, I mean, this is in the trailer.
Yeah.
His father gets killed, and that's the inciting incident for the War of the Rohirrim. And it's like, well, his father is only portrayed as bad.
Yeah.
And visually bad. Everything he's doing is bad. And we're only told this. We're not shown. I would have much preferred, if you're going to do this layered approach, and you've got animation, you've got boundless ability to show the beauty and full scope of Middle Earth. And yet you don't. You have what the problem with a lot of films recently that we've discussed, especially Kraven the Hunter, is let's talk about how bad people are and the badness they're doing, but never show it. I'm like, this person could have been bad to their own people, and apparently they didn't really have people, because then he goes and gets a new tribe with the wildlings, but they're not really developed. It's just a lot of, there is a villain that we must fight, even though our side is stupid and make foolish masculine decisions that lead to countless deaths. It just seems very standard. It seems like all the stories you're told about in very small snippets of history, and you think that these characters are just boneheaded idiots from the past, because you don't actually have the nuance and the emotional nuance and the context of the politics. And here is this striving to be a very strong female character, doesn't want to get married off into a new family to strengthen the foundations. And I think, well, wouldn't it be interesting, because if you're trying to, it's very medieval coded. And it's trying to sort of balance the line between a more modern perspective. Eowyn is the one who discusses it, and she has that famous line in The King, I am no man, to defeat the Witch King. And great sequence, and great, but she also is a more rounded character, more rounded character, because she wants to fight for her people. She, I guess fancy is a good word for arrogant, but knows it's unrequited. But then also still strives to be better and develop herself, and saves hobbits. She's a brilliant character, but I don't see that in the lead character here.
No.
She is just very much painted, wonderful fighter princess. It felt a lot like the characters from Solo Leveling, Reawakening, whatever. That it is just, these are archetypes that we're just going to throw in. And I come back to the point you said, it's this mythic storytelling. And it felt like that in some aspects, because the king, Helm Hammerhand, has almost supernatural powers of strength, which we don't really see. Okay, the humans in Lord of the Rings have greater resilience than human beings on Earth, but they're still human. They suffer, they die, and they're in pain. And a lot of characters die in this, but the king itself feels supernatural. They don't have any wizard relation or any. They don't drink any magical voodoo potion
like Asterix
or Kraven and get lion blood mixed with theirs. It just doesn't make any sense that you're trying to skirt the line, so it felt very unrealistic. It's an animation, but if you're going to go that way, go full legend. This is a full story that has been passed down for 200 years. It feels very much like, we're making this cool anime, but we also want to balance some nuance, but it's missed. It's completely missed. And also, you're right about the accents. And I find that, being from Greater Manchester, the villain being Mancunian is, these typical make the less refined accents according to standard. The idiots or the villains. Because the brothers who are clumsy and foolish, they have quite strong northern accents. And that Hera has a very RP, just normal British accent. It feels very coded. It feels that's not nuanced either.
No.
It just feels very blunt. I think that's the word I'll describe this film as. Blunt and also too long. Much too long.
I do agree with you. I think we could have lost a decent chunk of time, probably 40 minutes, honestly. And I think you would lose a lot of the first half. I don't think there's actually that much story in there. It's just so desperate to remind you of Lord of the Rings. I think my biggest complaint about this film, and I liked it a good deal more than you in that, I did like the third act. I thought that the big fight at the end between Hera and the villain, I thought was really visually striking. I enjoyed that.
It is beautiful.
But for me, the biggest problem with it is it has no sense of humor. There are zero jokes in this, like none whatsoever. And Lord of the Rings, very funny. Consistently very, very funny. I think we forget that because it's also epic and it's grand, but it's charming. And this has none of the lightness of those films, and it's all the worse for it. So at the end of the day, it feels like a bit of a missed opportunity. I think this could have been great. It turns out okay. And listen, I'm going back to the lasagna. If the Lord of the Rings trilogy is like a delicious homemade lasagna, you've spent 5 hours making it, like, the red winey sauce has been bubbling away for hours. It's delicious. This is like a Tesco, stick it in the microwave for 2 minutes.
There's a lot of horses in both.
Exactly. So it's okay. It'll fill you up. I don't know if the metaphor still works. It'll fill you up, but it won't necessarily nourish you. It's all right. It's fine. And finally, we are going to talk about Queer, which is the new film by Luca Guadagnino. Now, Challenges is currently my favourite film of 2024, but can Queer possibly topple that? Let's see. Jake, tell me your thoughts.
Lots of people have talked about the director, Luca Guadagnino. Call Me By Your Name comes up often. And in relation to this film, it has a close comparison, which is subject matter. And I'm showing my true colors. Someone can say I'm a hack filmmaker or whatever. I didn't really connect with that film very much. I thought that it felt a little aimless in places, felt a little cold to me. And this film shares aspects of cold characters.
Yes.
Drew Starkey's character is purposefully disconnected. But to me, that really helped the film. This film is about communication. There has a great line that runs throughout, is communicating without words.
Yes.
Whereas when you actually realize that communicating with words would help these people a lot. But that feeling, that emotional crux of we need to speak without words because we are queer in this world. In the 50s when it's set, this world that doesn't quite accept us. There's slurs that are referenced. I don't think there was any major slurs that was said, but there's just, the hate crimes are referenced. We don't see any of them.
Yes.
And just, the culture around queerdom in pre-legality era.
Yes.
And speaking without words. And I thought, as a mood piece, as an expression of feeling, I really connected through it. When I sat down and started the movie, I was like, oh, this is going to be a film I'm not going to like because it's going to be really depressing, be a really harrowing performance from Daniel Craig, and it's going to leave me feeling a certain way. But I was won over by the film and its eccentricities. I really was. I was won over by the look of it. It's aesthetically brilliant. So what's also really interesting about this film is the music. The music that is used, not just the score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, which is brilliant, as often their scores are, but also the needle drops that they use in this movie. It's quite sparing. I thought it would be more thorough throughout. It had a very late 80s, 90s feel, the needle drops that it had, the sort of songs they used. It had that element. It had that Kurt Cobain style of story, this self-destruction. The use of heroin throughout the film is prominent and also a story point. And the character's own self-destruction. Desperation is another angle that I thought it deals with this film really well. Daniel Craig, who I always admit, I think he's a fine Bond. In these films and the films he's done since, I really have latched onto his performance so much. I actually think he might even be one of my favorite actors working today. His stuff in Knives Out is hilarious, but also ridiculous in the best possible way.
I agree.
And this performance, and yes, it was bleak as I thought it would be. But I was just so connected to him. It was like I was watching a stage play and I was in the room with him. I felt very connected. I'm not sure if other people would feel the same, but something about his longing and desperation. He comes across quite predatory in the beginning. But then you are turned off by that because he's a much older man seeking the love and affection of much younger men. But then I felt his struggle. I felt his pain. And that's the whole point of the film. I can understand why people will be turned off by some of the more pretentious and aggressive elements in the film. The actual starkness, the pain is quite hard and inaccessible. However, as a tone poem, I was clued in, I was locked in, and I felt as a filmmaker that I followed along those pretentious rabbit holes, the dream sequences it uses. I actually didn't feel they were out of place or too much. I felt these are accurate to how someone who is queer, like myself, and it felt very accurate to a point of view. We can't express what we have to say. We are just instead trapped in this phantom world that was and we want to be close and connect with people, but can't speak about it because there's some danger of that. And yes, it had problems. It was a little aimless. But I was just so connected to it. And I'd love to know your opinion. I've been waffling on for a long time, but I'd love to know your opinion.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think the the problems that maybe you're expecting me to have with it aren't the problems that I do have, because as much as I think that, okay, I think it's too long. I do think it's too long. I think the cut that was, approved for its screening at Venice, was something over 3 hours. My goodness, I'm glad that we don't have that. I think it is overlong. I think it is indulgent. And I don't have a problem with, the kind of surrealistic sequences, the dream sequences. I think that they add character and they add flavor and they add value. But I did find the film to be quite emotionally cold. I thought Daniel Craig, I actually think this is a career best performance for him. I think he's absolutely exceptional. It's a gift for an actor, I think, this role, because his character, Lee, he's this big, sort of theatrical guy, right? He's always lurching into impressions of other people. He's always kind of, inhabiting roles. But it's because he's so uncomfortable with himself. And, when we meet him, as you say, he's basically spending his days just endlessly drinking and smoking, and his evening seeking kind of casual sex, but he's not really getting anything out of it. Like, it actually doesn't seem to be very, very fulfilling. And he talked about desperation. I think there is a desperation to be loved in that character. And I actually think Daniel Craig conveys so much of that just in his body language. I think that's one of the best things about his Bond, is he tells you a lot about that character from the way that he stands. And we see that in Queer. We learn about this character through the way that he walks into a room. I thought he was really brilliant. I think he'll be nominated at the Oscars, actually. I
hope so.
Brilliant.
I really hope so. It's phenomenal.
My problem is with the film as a whole, which I found, if it's a tone poem, I found the tone to be quite depressing. I didn't have a very fun time watching this. It reminded me of All of Us Strangers, which is another film where, a bit like this, I sort of loved for the first 2/3, and then the final third, I just felt a bit helpless and a bit crushed by it. And for all of the cinematic brilliance on display here and the acting prowess, and make no mistake, this is full of that. It's a brilliant piece of work. I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like watching it. I don't think I'll watch it again. I wonder if I need to read the book, and that will help me understand better why perhaps it takes some of the avenues it does. It feels like we have had, a number of films now from Luca Guadagnino, which have been, these kind of queer love stories, but which have been in many ways really upsetting. And there is a kind of, I think, bury your gaze trope within that, and also within All of Us Strangers. I don't know. I think I found it problematic and depressing.
No, I agree. And I think that is so commonplace with queer media, especially prestige film, which is a term I don't overly like saying, but this is trying to go for that. It's got
yes, it is.
The look, the performances, the caliber of actors, and the actual use of filmmaking techniques.
Yes.
And so in that standard, there is that trend to go to that very common bury your gaze trope. Gay stories and queer stories have to be tragic because of history and because of context. And especially with this time set, an old junkie who wasn't allowed to love or couldn't find love. And it gets exhausting. I think the film is quite exhausting. And I thought Call Me By Your Name was quite exhausting. Someone blossoming love, but it can't be fully accentuated or fully realized because of the parameters of queerness. And I myself, when I made my graduation film, it tackles with elements of the pain inflicted, the actual medical torture of gay people in this country. But also what I wanted to make was something where actually the love story was fully formed, and realizing these people weren't going to lose themselves because they were in love with each other, which this film does. Just because you do get very exhausted by the idea that, the only thing you're going to see is Brokeback Mountain, where things are
absolutely.
And these films are so important, but is it time to tell more beautiful stories that don't have this sheer gut wrenching?
It's a weight. It's such a weight. I think this film, and as much as it is brilliant, it's good storytelling. I don't know. I felt defeated by the end. I felt defeated by the film. I felt defeated by the runtime. And that's not to say it's bad. It is a good film. it is a good film. Like, you should go and watch it. But it wasn't really for me. I didn't like it. I didn't like the film. I admired it much more than I enjoyed it.
Something I really do want to pick up about this, which I really appreciated coming from the filmmaker background. And I've talked a lot about this film from that point of view, from my own filmmaker perspective, because it was the first film of our Cinema Spotlight run that I actually sat down and I felt very connected as someone who wants to pursue making film. I thought it really utilized editing, montage, and layering of shots of surrealism in a way that can be achieved through film very effectively. I understood the characters and I felt their emotional desires, and I felt the strain that they felt because of how it was placed. There's a sequence where, this might stretch into spoilers, but there's a sequence where they go on a drug trip, kind of like a drug trip, the two leads.
Which was phenomenally well done.
Really well done. And there's just a sequence where they're sat around a fire and the two start fading away. And because these characters are fading away from each other, fading away into something that doesn't really make any sense to them. They don't understand themselves. Even Daniel Craig, who's 50 odd in this film, playing his age, but it's very much like he's still unaware of the type of person he is.
Yeah.
And it's almost like a coming of age for several different ages again.
That's a great way of looking at it.
And I found it and it's hard and it's painful, but the visual language, the actual cinema of it all, the filmmaking of it all really told that tale to me in that words didn't have to. I did not need this dump of exposition to say, oh, this guy, why is Drew Starkey so cold? It's because he's a human being and he has feelings that don't need to be broadcasted to me. I sense them through the language of the filmmaker and his clear vision. And it is clear. To me, I think it's very clear what he wanted to achieve in this world, because I really was swept up in it.
Yeah.
And I understand it's bleak, and I understand it falls to that miserable trope of, yes, everything ends badly for people who aren't straight.
Yeah.
And that is tiring. I am tired of it. But for this film, which he's wanted to make for a long time, an old IP, a book that existed before queerness was respected and legal. Before it was legal.
Yeah.
And I really thought, yes, okay, it's a story we've seen the pain, but you've told it in a way that I'm fully on board with. People will walk out the cinema, but I'm firmly in my seat.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see what they do next, because as a filmmaker, I wanted to make a film again. wanted to jump out in the seat. I want to tell stories like that.
Yeah.
I really am excited.
To be fair, I mean, I don't disagree with you. I think that this is exactly the film that everyone involved wanted to make, and I completely agree. Like, on a cinematic level, it's sort of almost alchemical at times. You know, it's like, wow, I can't believe that I'm sort of seeing this, because it feels so fluid, and I think it has a sense of spirituality to it. One point that I thought was really interesting was, you talked about, how the characters want to communicate without words, and the film is actually doing that for you. That, I think, is really impressive. And I think that so much of what we then get in the film, as a kind of exploration of character, makes sense when you kind of take into account this idea that it's showing and not telling. What I do think is interesting is how physicality is also involved, in terms of there is a tenderness and there is also a sort of pain that we see on these bodies.
Abrasive,
in comparison to something like Challengers, which I also thought was really interested in anatomy, I thought they made quite an interesting side-by-side comparison, because you actually have, in Challengers, obviously, we have so much of this idea about like an athlete's body telling the story, and almost I felt like this was continuing that thread, because as you talked about the drug trip, there is almost a fusing of bodies. There is almost a uniting of souls in that sequence. And it just, to me, it almost felt like poetry. It almost felt like a poem of a film. There's all of this harmony going on. And I liked how that was, kind of linking also to his wider work. I think this very much sits within that, within his own oeuvre in a very interesting way. So, I mean, look, we're on different pages, I think, but I admired it. I thought it was excellent cinema, but I'm not sure that I'll be heading back. Will you be rewatching this one?
Rewatch is a hard one, because you're right. When you are met with something so dark, and it's like when we talked about On Becoming a Guinea Fowl, it would be worth a rewatch just to see the nuances, to actually take note of the filmmaking at work here, at play here. But also, you'd need to be in the right mood.
Yeah.
I went in quite blind to this film. The trailers don't really reveal much. Quite beautifully done, the trailer, I think, and encapsulates a lot more of the film than I thought in sort of tone.
Yeah.
However, yes, it would take a bit of a time, but I think I would like to sit down and rewatch it, maybe with another person, and just really see how they react, and see if I react in a different way. Would I recommend it? My producer says he loves when I say not to my mother, but yeah, to a wider audience, especially if you're an aspiring filmmaker or writer, or just want to experience a very accurate portrayal of feeling without words, lack of exposition, a really crafty film that really did paint it in such a neat, beautiful colors. And the cinematography is excellent too. So you're also looking at something beautiful. And so, yeah, it would take a while before I rewatch it, but I would recommend it to the right people. So, Reuben, it's lovely to be back in front of the red curtain. We had a steamer this week, so it's a little neater, getting better all the time, as the Beatles once said. But I'd love to know what your recommendation of this week is, and what's your favorite? If you have a recommendation.
Could my favorite of the week be anything other than the absolute masterpiece that is Kraven the Hunter? I mean, what an incredible film!
I have to agree with you. Yes, people should go see this movie. Don't listen to the interview or the review we just gave.
You know, I can't even continue with that joke. But it's under no circumstances should you go and watch Kraven the Hunter. It's a complete waste of your time and money. It's very, very bad. My film of the week is Queer. I do have some problems with it, but that's mostly, I think, just, you know, on a personal issue. You know, I don't think it's necessarily for me, but I do think Daniel Craig is extraordinary in it. It's brilliant filmmaking by Luca Guadagnino, and it's certainly a conversation starter as well. You know, go and watch this with your friends. Go and watch this with your family if they're maybe not your mum. You know, I think this would be a really interesting one to watch and then go to the pub and discuss, because it sure is meaty. There's a lot to chew over. So yes, Queer is my pick of the week.
Yes, I have to agree with you. I was so emphatic about it, and just for a creator, for artistic people, or just generally people who enjoy cinema, I believe it really is why I'd love to go see in the cinema. Something that really inspired and also surprised me.
Yeah.
Because I had no idea it was going to take the turns it did, and I thought it was a very brave film. And also, Daniel Craig, as I said, is becoming one of my favorite actors. I can't wait to see him in Knives Out 3. I can't wait to see him in whatever else he does. And I have an anti-recommendation for Kraven, like you. I think that's a vacuous black hole, black mold spreading across the world, the cinemas of the world, and I think it should be ripped from cinemas, and all remnants of it should be burnt in a fire. So yeah, don't check it out. Thank you ever so much for joining us on episode 6 of Cinema Spotlight. It's been a really wild last couple of episodes, and we're really grateful for you guys tuning in and listening to us week in, week out, wobbling on about films.
Next week, we will be taking a little bit of a break, but we'll be back soon with reviews of Nosferatu, We Live in Time, and of course, Nickel Boys. We'll see you then.
We'll see you then, and have a very Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas indeed.
Merry Christmas to you too.